She instilled fear in every alien heart, until one human defied the stars. The galaxy of Vierlia was vast, full of sparkling stars and countless worlds. Among these countless systems, one figure stood above all others, a queen whose very name made aliens tremble. Zerlia was her name, and her presence commanded respect and fear wherever she went. Entire civilizations had bent to her will, not because she was cruel, but because she understood them better than they understood themselves. Her strategies were precise, her words sharp, and her mind unmatched in its clarity. She was known across the galaxy as the ruler who could read intentions and predict actions before anyone else knew they had taken them. Zerlia's fleet was unlike any other. Sleek starships, advanced beyond the understanding of most, glided through space in perfect formation. They carried envoys, supplies, and observation equipment to monitor distant systems. Any species that dared approach without proper communication found themselves met with a display of calculated authority, a presence so commanding it left no room for challenge. Aliens whispered her name in fear, and her reputation traveled faster than any starship. Yet beneath this fearsome exterior, Zerlia was methodical and thoughtful. She never acted without reason, and she had never been known to harm without cause. Far from the core of Vierlia, on the edge of the galaxy, there was a small human colony orbiting a quiet sun. It was a humble place, simple in its technology compared to the grand civilizations closer to the center. The humans there lived ordinary lives, farming, trading, exploring, and dreaming of distant stars. One among them was Kale, a young man whose curiosity often led him to places others avoided. Unlike most humans, he did not fear the unknown. The legends of Zerlia had reached him, stories of her power and intelligence, but instead of fear, Kale felt fascination. He wanted to understand her, to see if the tales were true, and if so, what lay beneath the image of the fearless queen. The day Zerlia's fleet appeared above the human colony, the population panicked. Messages from the Central Command warned of an approaching vessel of unknown purpose. Some feared it was an attack, others believed it might be a test of their loyalty. The colony's leaders scrambled to prepare for the Queen's arrival, unsure of what to expect. And when the massive flagship finally descended into orbit, casting a shadow across the settlement, everyone held their breath. Zerlia stepped onto the observation platform of her ship, her gaze sweeping across the colony below. She was exactly as the stories described, tall, poised, and perfectly composed. Her eyes seemed to look through people, assessing intentions without a word spoken. She was aware of every movement, every signal, every subtle shift of emotion. The humans, small and fragile by comparison, instinctively bowed and lowered their heads. But among them Kale stood apart. He did not bow, he did not flinch. Instead, he observed her with careful attention, recognizing not only the power in her presence but also the intelligence that accompanied it. It was a small act, almost unnoticeable, but Zerlia noticed. She had spent centuries surrounded by beings who feared her, yet here was one human who met her gaze without trembling. Intrigued, she decided to observe him further. She began sending minor requests to the colony, testing the human's response and watching Kale carefully. Each time he acted with clarity, solving problems calmly, without panic or hesitation. It was unlike anything she had encountered. Kale, on the other hand, was unaware of the attention he had drawn. He simply acted as he always did, focusing on the practicalities of the situation. A misunderstanding had arisen between the alien envoys and the colony leaders, an error in translation that could have escalated into a diplomatic disaster. Kale stepped forward, using his understanding of both human and alien customs to bridge the gap. His words were measured, respectful, and intelligent, and the aliens listened. The misunderstanding was resolved without conflict, and Zerlia observed every moment, silently impressed. After the successful resolution, Zerlia requested a private audience with Kale. The colony leaders were shocked. No human had ever been granted such a request, let alone someone as young and inexperienced as Kale. Nervous and excited, Kale prepared for the meeting. He did not know what to expect, only that he must remain composed. When he entered the observation deck of the flagship, he found Zerlia standing before a vast window that overlooked the stars. She was even more imposing up close, yet there was a sense of curiosity in her expression. "Kale," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "You have handled yourself well, most would have faltered." Kale bowed politely, then met her gaze. "I only tried to understand the problem. I wanted to find a solution that worked for everyone." Zerlia studied him silently for a moment. His calm demeanor, clear thinking, and lack of fear were unusual. She had spent centuries observing countless species, and none had approached her with such steadiness. "It is rare," she said finally, "to find someone so unshaken in my presence." Their conversation continued for hours. Kale asked questions about her fleet, her responsibilities, and the system she governed. Zerlia, in turn, asked questions about human colonies, their ways of life, and their approach to diplomacy. Each answered with honesty and clarity, and gradually, a mutual respect began to form. The human offered perspectives Zerlia had not considered, solutions grounded in empathy, creativity, and practicality. The queen, who had always relied on fear and intelligence, began to see the value in these simple human insights. Outside the observation deck, the colony watched nervously. Rumors spread quickly. A human had been granted an audience with the feared queen herself. Whispers of awe and disbelief filled the settlement. How could a single human stand in the presence of such power and remain unshaken? Kale, unaware of the stir he caused, simply focused on listening, learning, and offering his perspective. Zerlia's advisors grew concerned. "No human has ever endured so long in conversation with you without faltering," one of them warned. "It could weaken your authority." But Zerlia was already reconsidering. She saw not weakness but potential. This human did not fear her, yet he did not challenge her recklessly. He respected the rules of engagement while bringing new ideas. Perhaps leadership was not solely about instilling fear, she thought. Perhaps there was strength in understanding, in collaboration, and in respecting the perspectives of others. As the meeting concluded, Zerlia invited Kale to continue working with her fleet on matters of diplomacy and trade. It was unprecedented, but she recognized that his unique insights could be valuable. For Kale, the opportunity was overwhelming yet exhilarating. He had never imagined that his curiosity and calm approach could capture the attention of the galaxy's most feared queen. In the following days, Kale accompanied Zerlia as she conducted inspections of her fleet and negotiated agreements with distant colonies. Everywhere they went, the presence of a human who did not fear her changed the dynamic. Aliens who had long bowed in terror found themselves intrigued and cautious. The human, without realizing it, was altering perceptions of Zerlia herself. Where fear had once dominated, curiosity and respect began to grow. Zerlia watched this transformation quietly. She realized that fear could maintain order, but understanding could inspire loyalty. Kale, in his quiet and steadfast way, was teaching her a lesson she had not anticipated, that even the most terrifying figure could learn from someone smaller, gentler, and seemingly less powerful. By the end of the first week, Zerlia's reputation began to shift subtly. Aliens who had once seen her as untouchable began to wonder if there was another side to her, a leader capable of both fear and admiration. And Kale, still unaware of the full impact he had made, continued to navigate the complexities of diplomacy with honesty, patience, and courage. The galaxy of Vierlia, vast and full of stars, had already begun to notice the unusual partnership forming on the edge of its systems. The feared queen and the unflinching human were changing expectations. one careful conversation at a time. And somewhere in the silent corridors of the flagship, Zerlia allowed herself a rare thought. Perhaps this human could teach her more than any advisor, more than any strategist, and maybe, just maybe, he could help her see a way to lead that went beyond fear alone. As the days turned into weeks, Kale's understanding of the galaxy deepened and Zerlia's respect for him grew. The first steps of an unexpected alliance were forming, a bond that would not rely on intimidation, but on courage, intellect, and mutual respect. It was the beginning of a story that no one had predicted, one that would challenge the traditions of entire civilizations. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Sometimes, the smallest and quietest voices could make the greatest difference. After their first meetings, Kale found himself spending more time aboard Zerlia's flagship. The ship was enormous, a labyrinth of halls, observation decks, and chambers, all buzzing with alien technology far beyond anything Kale had seen before. Yet, despite the intimidating machinery and the alien crew bustling about, Kale never felt out of place. He observed carefully, learned quickly, and asked questions politely, earning the quiet respect of many who worked there. Zerlia watched him closely. Every decision he made, every question he asked, revealed not just curiosity but a methodical approach to problem solving. Where most beings reacted with fear or self-interest, Kale weighed the options, considered consequences, and sought solutions that could benefit everyone. It was a human quality that fascinated her. She had spent centuries ruling through strategy and reputation, but here was a being who showed her another way, through insight, patience, and understanding. One morning, as the flagship drifted near a dense asteroid belt, Zerlia called Kale to the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before them, glittering through the transparent walls of the ship. "There are colonies beyond this belt," Zerlia said, her voice calm but precise. "They are in dispute over resources. Their conflict could escalate if we do not intervene carefully." Kale nodded, scanning the holographic display that projected the colony's territories. "It looks complicated. Both sides feel strongly about what they claim, but there is overlap that could be shared. Maybe we can suggest a rotation system or resource exchanges so neither side feels cheated." Zerlia raised an eyebrow. "Many would attempt to impose a solution. They would dictate, they would threaten. You suggest compromise. Do you believe it will work?" Kale hesitated, then smiled slightly. "It depends on how it is presented. If both sides understand that this benefits everyone, they will listen. If they see it as someone taking control, they will resist. Respect and logic often speak louder than force." The Queen considered this. She had rarely allowed others to shape her approach to problems. Most species bent to her decisions, fearing the consequences of disobedience. But Kale's words carried no threat, no hidden agenda. They were reasoned, fair, and clear. Slowly, she realized that perhaps there was merit in seeing situations through another perspective, even if it meant setting aside her instincts for domination. Over the next several days, Kale assisted Zerlia in communicating with the colonies. He drafted messages, translated cultural nuances, and mediated between leaders who had been suspicious of outside intervention. At first, the alien representatives were wary. Humans were not known for interstellar diplomacy, and Kale was just one person. But they quickly noticed that his proposals were thoughtful, well-reasoned, and neutral. They began to respond with cooperation rather than hostility. Zerlia observed the process quietly. She noted how Kale's approach contrasted sharply with the typical strategies used across the galaxy. Where she relied on fear to secure obedience, Kale relied on clarity and fairness. And unexpectedly, it worked. Conflict diminished, misunderstandings were resolved, and alliances strengthened. The Queen realized that leadership could inspire loyalty without intimidation, a lesson she had never truly considered before. As Kale spent more time aboard the flagship, he began learning about the fleet's inner workings. He was fascinated by the alien technology, ships that could adjust shape to suit their environment, engines that harnessed the energy of stars, and communication systems that transmitted data instantaneously across light years. Yet Kale approached it with humility. He asked questions, observed, and offered suggestions when he saw small improvements that could make processes more efficient. Zerlia noticed his attentiveness and the calm confidence with which he operated. One afternoon, Zerlia invited Kale to join her in the fleet's strategy room. Holographic star maps illuminated the room with soft light, showing territories, trade routes, and strategic points across the galaxy. "I want your opinion," she said. "Our alliances are strong, but some of our neighbors do not understand our intentions. Many of them fear us simply because we are powerful. What do you think we should do?" Kale studied the maps carefully. "I think you could start by showing them you are willing to listen. Not just to demands, but to concerns. Sometimes, even small gestures of consideration can change perceptions. If you explain why actions are taken and how everyone benefits, they might trust you more." Zerlia leaned back, contemplating. She had built her reputation on decisiveness and foresight, but she had rarely considered the value of transparency. Most species interpreted power as intimidation, not responsibility. Kale's perspective challenged her assumptions. "You believe transparency can replace fear?" she asked quietly. Kale nodded. "Not replace entirely, but balance it. Respect and understanding can reinforce authority more than fear alone. People respond better when they feel heard and considered." It was a revolutionary thought for Zerlia. She realized that fear had always been her shield, a way to maintain order. But Kale showed her that order could also be built on respect, collaboration, and empathy. And more importantly, she saw that she could retain her strength while embracing these new methods. Word of Kale's approach began to spread quietly among the fleet. Crew members who had always followed orders out of obligation now listened with interest. They watched the Queen's interactions with him and noticed a change. Where Zerlia had once relied on authority alone, she now incorporated insight from a human who dared to think differently. Slowly, her leadership began evolving, though she herself had not fully acknowledged it. One day, the fleet encountered a stranded alien research vessel trapped near a collapsing asteroid. The crew inside was panicked, unsure how to navigate the dangerous debris. Many feared that rescue would be impossible. Zerlia's fleet could have simply taken control and directed the operation with authority, but she asked Kale for his input. Kale carefully analyzed the asteroid patterns and suggested a step-by-step approach that minimized risk while ensuring the research vessel could escape safely. His method relied on clear communication, coordination, and trust between the crews. Zerlia implemented his plan. To her surprise, it worked perfectly. The research vessel was freed without any damage, and the alien crew expressed gratitude and admiration. The event marked a turning point. Zerlia realized that Kale's methods were not just effective, they inspired cooperation. Fear could achieve obedience, but respect could achieve collaboration. And collaboration, she understood, could lead to far greater success. As the fleet continued its journey, Kale and Zerlia spent hours discussing philosophy, leadership, and ethics. Kale shared stories of human history, highlighting moments where ordinary people had influenced entire civilizations through wisdom and courage rather than power. Zerlia, in turn, explained the complexities of ruling multiple star systems and maintaining order among vastly different species. Their conversations were rich, deep, and without pretense. Neither sought to dominate the other, both sought understanding. The Queen's advisors remained wary. They questioned why she spent so much time with a human, why she seemed influenced by his ideas, and whether this could undermine her authority. Zerlia listened but made no hasty decisions. She was learning that true strength was not about showing fearlessness. It was about knowing when to adapt, when to listen, and when to trust others. Kale, unaware of the subtle political implications, continued his work with humility and care. He mediated disputes, suggested improvements in trade agreements, and helped Zerlia communicate effectively with allies. Everywhere he went, he demonstrated that humans could be a force of reason and inspiration, not just simple beings trying to survive among powerful species. The galaxy began noticing the change. Aliens who had once trembled at Zerlia's name now hesitated, unsure what to expect. Was she still the queen who instilled fear? Or had she found a new way to lead, guided by the insights of one unassuming human? The question spread quietly from system to system, creating a sense of curiosity and anticipation. Meanwhile, Zerlia herself felt a shift. She had always prided herself on her control, her clarity, and her ability to command respect through reputation. Kale showed her that respect could be earned in ways that did not rely on fear. She began experimenting with new approaches, listening more, explaining her actions, and fostering dialogue with other species. The change was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it had a profound effect. Kale continued to thrive in this environment. He did not seek recognition, nor did he desire power. His strength lay in his calm reasoning, his ability to see solutions where others saw problems, and his courage to speak honestly even in the presence of the most powerful figure in the galaxy. Zerlia admired him not just for his intellect, but for his character, the quiet courage that inspired those around him to reconsider what leadership could be. By the end of the second month, the first signs of transformation were visible across the regions under Zerlia's influence. Disputes were resolved more peacefully, alliances were strengthened, and fear was no longer the sole motivator for compliance. Kale's influence, subtle yet undeniable, had begun to reshape the way the galaxy perceived leadership. Zerlia realized something remarkable. She had never truly understood the value of partnership, of listening to someone outside her own species. Humans, she observed, were capable of insight and courage in ways she had not expected. And this particular human, Kale, had not only challenged the assumptions of her people, but had also challenged her assumptions about herself. The galaxy was vast, and many challenges still lay ahead. Yet in the quiet moments aboard the flagship, Zerlia allowed herself to imagine a different future, a future where power and respect could coexist, where fear was not the only tool, and where a human could inspire change across the stars. And for Kale, the journey had only just begun. He had stepped into a world of stars and fearsome leaders, yet he navigated it with honesty, humility, and courage. Unbeknownst to him, his presence was already transforming one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy. The story of a human who dared to think differently had begun, and the galaxy was quietly taking notice. The galaxy had begun to notice the unusual partnership between Kale and Zerlia. Aliens from distant systems who had once whispered her name in fear now wondered what had changed. Reports of a human who advised the queen, guided her decisions, and influenced her actions spread quietly but quickly. For Zerlia, it was a time of reflection. She had always relied on reputation, fear, and authority to maintain order, but Kale's presence was opening a new path. He was teaching her that strength could coexist with understanding, and authority could inspire respect without intimidation. One morning, as the flagship glided through the space near a dense nebula, Kale was called to the strategy room once again. Holographic projections displayed 3 neighboring systems, each governed by different alien factions. They were on the verge of a trade dispute that could disrupt interstellar commerce. Zerlia had studied the situation for months, yet she asked Kale to provide his thoughts. Kale leaned over the projections, analyzing shipping routes, communication patterns, and resource distribution. "The problem is not the resources themselves," he said slowly. "It's how each system perceives fairness." If we can create a solution that shows equal benefit, both sides might cooperate. Zerlia studied him. Explain how you would approach it. Kale traced paths across the hologram, suggesting a schedule for resource exchanges, joint research projects, and shared trade agreements. He even proposed a method to ensure both sides had oversight to prevent misunderstandings. Zerlia listened carefully, occasionally interjecting with questions. The discussion went on for hours, and by the end, the plan was not only feasible but elegant. Zerlia implemented Kale's suggestions. For the first time, she relied not solely on her experience and authority, but on the ideas of someone outside her species. The results were immediate. The alien systems began communicating more openly, cooperation increased, and the risk of conflict decreased. It was a small victory, but it signaled a larger shift in how the galaxy viewed leadership. Meanwhile, Kale continued to observe the fleet and its operations. He noticed subtle inefficiencies in coordination and logistics. Though he lacked the centuries of experience Zerlia possessed, his perspective brought fresh insights. Small changes to communication protocols and resource allocation improved fleet efficiency, and Zerlia allowed him to implement them. Crew members began to notice that the human suggestions were practical and beneficial, and their trust in his abilities grew. During their travels, Zerlia decided to show Kale the outer edges of her territory. They approached a cluster of newly discovered colonies, each with unique challenges. One planet had extreme weather patterns that made agriculture difficult. Another faced energy shortages because their sun emitted irregular radiation. Kale studied the problems carefully and offered solutions rooted in practicality and ingenuity. Zerlia observed how he approached each challenge, not with fear, not with intimidation, but with understanding. On the planet with energy shortages, Kale suggested a network of energy collectors that could harness the sun's radiation more efficiently. The local scientists were skeptical at first, but Kale explained the system step by step. They implemented the plan, and within weeks, the planet had a reliable energy supply. News of this success spread throughout the cluster. Aliens and humans alike began to see Kale not as a mere human, but as a problem solver capable of bridging cultural and technological gaps. Zerlia, too, felt the shift within herself. She realized that her previous methods of maintaining order, while effective, could now be complemented with collaboration and understanding. She began asking Kale for input on diplomatic missions, trade negotiations, and even the management of her own fleet. The more she listened, the more she saw the value in human perspectives. She understood that Kale's ideas were not just solutions, they were a reflection of human resilience, creativity, and courage. As the weeks passed, Kale's reputation grew beyond Zerlia's fleet. Word reached distant star systems that a human had earned the Queen's trust and contributed to peace and progress across multiple colonies. Aliens who had once trembled at the thought of Zerlia's presence began to approach her more cautiously, curious rather than fearful. They had seen her reliance on a human advisor and wondered how this dynamic worked. The balance of fear and respect in the galaxy was beginning to change. Zerlia's advisors, however, remained cautious. They questioned her reliance on Kale, worrying that it might undermine her authority. "He is just a human," one advisor said. "He has no experience ruling, no knowledge of alien politics, yet you listen to him as if he understands more than we do." Zerlia considered their words but did not respond immediately. She had witnessed Kale's abilities firsthand. He approached problems logically, empathetically, and without ego. Unlike many who sought power, he sought understanding, and his success was undeniable. "Authority," she replied quietly to her advisors, "is not measured by fear alone. It is measured by the ability to create solutions that inspire cooperation." As their journey continued, Zerlia and Kale encountered a region known for its unstable wormholes. Trade ships frequently became trapped, and rescue operations were dangerous and costly. Most commanders avoided the area entirely, leaving colonies isolated and struggling. Zerlia turned to Kale for advice. Kale studied the wormhole patterns for days, mapping out safe routes and timing windows. He proposed a monitoring system that would allow ships to navigate the unstable space with minimal risk. Zerlia implemented the system, and it worked perfectly. Colonies that had long felt abandoned now had reliable connections to trade routes. Zerlia observed the relief and gratitude of the people, and realized that the combination of her authority and Kale's insight could create progress in ways she had never imagined. During one long observation session, Zerlia and Kale discussed leadership philosophy. Humans have a saying, Kale explained, that courage is not the absence of fear but the ability to act despite it. Many people let fear guide them, others use it to control. But the strongest leaders, true leaders, use understanding, collaboration, and empathy alongside their strength. Zerlia considered his words. For centuries, she had relied on fear as a tool, believing it was the most reliable method to maintain order. Yet Kale's perspective suggested another path, one that required patience, trust, and respect. She realized that her reputation as a fearsome queen had been just one part of her power. The other part, true, lasting influence, came from inspiring others, not intimidating them. News of Kale's achievements reached the Central Council of the Galaxy, composed of representatives from various civilizations. They had always respected Zerlia for her power, but now they were curious. How could a human influence the queen? Some questioned whether this could weaken her authority, while others wondered if it represented a new model of leadership. The question spread across star systems, prompting discussion, debate, and cautious optimism. Zerlia, aware of the whispers, chose to embrace the change rather than resist it. She invited Kale to continue advising on larger-scale matters, including interstellar trade agreements and resource allocation. The more she involved him, the more she saw that his perspective could prevent conflicts before they started. The galaxy was full of misunderstandings, often caused by fear, pride, or miscommunication. Kale's approach, clear, logical, and respectful, was slowly changing the balance. One day, they received a message from a distant colony experiencing internal disagreements over governance. Factions argued about leadership, resources, and representation, and tensions were rising. Zerlia initially considered sending an imposing fleet to assert control, but she paused. Instead, she asked Kale for a solution. Kale proposed a series of mediations where each faction could express concerns while neutral observers ensured fairness. He suggested a shared council that allowed each faction to contribute to decisions collaboratively. Zerlia implemented the plan and monitored its progress carefully. To everyone's surprise, the factions cooperated. Disputes were resolved, compromises made, and the colony began functioning more efficiently than before. This success marked another turning point. Zerlia realized that Kale's human qualities, patience, empathy, and rationality, were not weaknesses. They were strengths. By combining her authority with his insights, she could achieve results that neither could accomplish alone. And the galaxy was beginning to notice this subtle but powerful shift. As the flagship continued its journey, Kale and Zerlia faced another challenge. A neighboring system had long been isolated due to unstable travel routes, and its people had become distrustful of outsiders. Zerlia's fleet could have imposed control, but Kale suggested a different approach. Build trust through dialogue, shared projects, and visible support rather than intimidation. Following his advice, Zerlia personally visited the system, accompanied by Kale. Together, they helped construct trade hubs, shared technology, and held councils with local leaders. Slowly, suspicion gave way to cooperation. The system integrated peacefully into the interstellar network, and Zerlia saw firsthand the effectiveness of Kale's approach. Over time, the humans' influence extended beyond Zerlia's immediate operations. Aliens from other regions began seeking advice on implementing fairer, more cooperative systems. They asked about the human who had inspired the Queen, curious about his methods. Kale remained humble, focusing on solving problems rather than seeking recognition, yet his impact continued to grow. Zerlia, meanwhile, began to reflect on her own transformation. She had always believed that fear was the foundation of power, but Kale had shown her another path. Strength could coexist with respect, authority could inspire rather than intimidate, and collaboration could achieve more than domination. She realized that she had underestimated humans, not their resilience alone, but their capacity to influence even the most powerful beings through courage, wisdom, and heart. By the end of Part 3, Kale had become more than an advisor. He was a catalyst for change across the galaxy. His calm reasoning, integrity, and humanity had begun to reshape perceptions of leadership, diplomacy, and influence. Zerlia, once the queen who instilled fear in every alien heart, now found herself learning, evolving, and embracing a new way of leading. And in the quiet moments aboard her flagship, she often reflected on a simple truth. Courage and understanding, even from the smallest beings, could change the galaxy in ways power alone never could. The partnership between the Queen and the human had become a quiet revolution. Across distant stars and isolated worlds, the story of a fearless human influencing the galaxy's most formidable leader spread. The universe had begun to recognize that sometimes the smallest voice, the calmest mind, and the most courageous heart could leave the deepest mark. And as Kale continued his journey beside Zerlia, he had no idea how far his influence would reach, or how profoundly he was reshaping the galaxy, one thoughtful solution at a time. The galaxy was changing in subtle ways, though few realized it yet. The name of Zerlia, the queen who had once inspired fear in every alien heart, was still spoken with respect, but now it carried another meaning. Alongside her, Kale the human had become a symbol of courage, wisdom, and calm reasoning. Aliens who had once feared the queen now watched her with curiosity, noting that she listened, that she collaborated, and that her power was no longer imposed through intimidation alone. Zerlia's fleet continued its journeys through star systems far and wide. Kale accompanied her, observing and learning, but also advising and influencing. One morning, as they approached a region of newly discovered colonies, Zerlia turned to Kale with a question she had not voiced before. "You have observed many civilizations now," she said. "What do you see as the greatest challenge for leaders, human?" Kale thought carefully. "I think the hardest part is being fair while remaining decisive. Leaders are judged by their actions, but also by how they make others feel. If you are only focused on results without considering people, trust is lost. If you are too cautious, nothing is accomplished. Balance is the key." Zerlia considered his words, the hum of the flagship around them filling the space between thoughts. She had always prided herself on decisiveness, but she realized that she had often neglected the importance of trust and understanding. Kale's perspective was reshaping her approach, not by challenging her authority, but by showing her how authority could coexist with empathy. The new colonies posed a unique challenge. They were young settlements, each struggling to establish stable governance, trade, and communication with one another. They lacked experience with interstellar diplomacy and often misinterpreted intentions. Zerlia could have easily imposed her will, dictating terms and establishing control, but Kale suggested a different approach. "Let them speak first," Kale said. "Listen to their concerns. A solution that comes from their input will be stronger and more accepted. If they feel they are part of the process, they will cooperate naturally." Zerlia followed his advice. She convened councils on each planet, giving the settlers space to express worries, ideas, and ambitions. Kale assisted in translating concerns, mediating between different factions, and presenting solutions that honored each colony's perspective. The results were remarkable. Tensions dissolved, trade agreements were made, and communities began to cooperate in ways that Zerlia had not expected. The queen observed quietly, amazed at how simple human reasoning could inspire action. Aliens who had previously resisted her leadership now approached with openness, curious to participate in discussions rather than fearing punishment or retribution. Zerlia realized that she had underestimated the power of dialogue and mutual respect. She had once believed that fear ensured compliance. Now she saw that understanding ensured collaboration. As they traveled through the systems, Zerlia and Kale faced new challenges. One colony was experiencing a shortage of clean water due to a natural imbalance in the planet's aquifers. Another had difficulty maintaining communications because of magnetic interference from the planet's star. Kale approached each problem methodically. He did not claim to have all the answers, but he observed carefully, analyzed the available information, and proposed practical solutions. On the water-short planet, Kale suggested a network of filtration systems powered by the planet's geothermal energy. Local engineers were initially hesitant, but Kale explained the process patiently, using simple demonstrations and visual aids. Within weeks, the colony had access to reliable clean water. On the communication-challenged planet, Kale recommended adjustments to signal frequencies and strategic placement of relay stations. The plan worked, and the colony's trade and communication systems improved dramatically. Zerlia watched these successes with a mixture of pride and surprise. She had always thought her influence depended on her own abilities alone, but now she understood that collaboration could achieve far greater results. Kale's insight, combined with her authority and resources, allowed for solutions that neither could have accomplished independently. She began to appreciate that true power included the ability to trust, to delegate, and to listen. Word of Kale's methods reached other parts of the galaxy. Aliens who had once believed humans were weak or insignificant now reconsidered. They heard stories of a human who advised the Queen, who solved complex problems, and who inspired cooperation across multiple systems. Kale remained humble. He never sought recognition or praise. He simply continued to observe, learn, and apply reason wherever he could. Yet his influence was undeniable, and the galaxy began to take notice. Zerlia's advisors were divided in their opinions. Some feared that Kale's growing influence might undermine the Queen's authority. Others recognized the positive outcomes and argued that his presence strengthened her leadership. Zerlia herself was evolving. She no longer relied solely on fear. She combined decisiveness with understanding, authority with respect, and observation with collaboration. The transformation was subtle but profound. During one long journey through the outer rim of her territory, Zerlia and Kale encountered a cluster of colonies facing internal disputes. Factions argued over resources, leadership, and trade priorities. Zerlia's first instinct had been to assert her authority to impose order swiftly, but Kale suggested a different approach. "Let them work it out themselves," he said. "Guide them, provide options, but don't dictate. If they reach a solution on their own, it will last longer than anything imposed from outside." Zerlia followed his advice. She provided a neutral space for discussion, observed carefully, and allowed the colonies to develop their own agreements. Kale facilitated communication, ensured fairness, and offered practical suggestions when necessary. The colonies successfully resolved their disputes, creating systems of governance that balanced the needs of all factions. Zerlia realized that her role as a leader could include guidance rather than control. The Queen found herself reflecting on these experiences frequently. She had always believed that fear ensured loyalty, but Kale had demonstrated that respect and collaboration could create stronger, more lasting bonds. She began to think of leadership as a partnership rather than a hierarchy, a way to inspire rather than intimidate. Meanwhile, Kale continued to observe the galaxy with curiosity. He marveled at the diversity of life, the ingenuity of different civilizations, and the complexities of interstellar diplomacy. He had never imagined that his own simple approach, listening, reasoning, and offering practical solutions, could influence a being as powerful as Zerlia, yet the results spoke for themselves. Systems were stabilizing, conflicts were diminishing, and the Queen herself was evolving as a leader. The partnership between Kale and Zerlia became more apparent to others as well. Aliens who had once feared her now approached with cautious curiosity. Humans from other colonies heard of a fellow human working alongside the Queen and were inspired by his courage and intellect. Kale's influence spread quietly but steadily, reshaping perceptions of what humans could contribute to the galaxy. Zerlia's confidence in him grew. She began to rely on his judgment in areas she had never before considered. Trade negotiations, infrastructure projects, resource distribution, and diplomatic communications, all were enhanced by Kale's insight. His ability to analyze, mediate, and propose solutions was unmatched, and Zerlia saw the results of combining his ideas with her authority and resources. During one long mission to a remote system, they discovered a planet with a struggling educational network. Schools lacked teachers, learning materials were scarce, and young learners had little guidance. Kale proposed a solution, a network of mobile instructors, supplemented by interactive holographic lessons, shared across multiple colonies. The plan was ambitious but feasible. Zerlia approved it, and within months, the educational systems improved dramatically. Children gained access to knowledge, skills, and opportunities that had been previously unavailable. The success of these initiatives began to shift the perception of leadership across the galaxy. Aliens who had once believed in ruling through fear began to observe Zerlia's new approach. They saw that strength could coexist with empathy, that authority could be reinforced by respect, and that collaboration could achieve outcomes impossible through intimidation alone. Kale, without seeking recognition, had become a catalyst for change. Even Zerlia's own people noticed the difference. Crew members of her fleet felt empowered rather than intimidated. Colonies responded with cooperation rather than fear. The Queen's influence was no longer defined solely by the threat of her power. It was enhanced by her ability to inspire, guide, and trust others. Kale had helped her discover a new dimension of leadership, one that valued insight, understanding, and partnership alongside strength. As the flagship moved between star systems, Kale and Zerlia spent quiet moments discussing philosophy, leadership, and ethics. They spoke about the responsibilities of power, the importance of communication, and the need to understand the perspectives of others. Kale shared examples from human history where courage and insight had changed the course of events, while Zerlia shared lessons from centuries of governance and interstellar strategy. Each learned from the other, and together they developed a vision of leadership that could transform not just one planet or colony, but the galaxy itself. By the end of this part of their journey, Zerlia had changed profoundly. She remained a queen of great power, respected and admired by countless species, but she had discovered the value of listening, collaborating, and trusting those who approached her with honesty and insight. Kale had taught her that courage was not just physical or political, it was intellectual, moral, and emotional. It was the ability to stand firm yet open-minded, to act decisively yet with empathy. The galaxy, too, was beginning to change. Where once fear had dominated relationships and diplomacy, curiosity, respect, and collaboration were gaining ground. Aliens and humans alike were learning that strength could be expressed in many ways, and that even a single human could make a profound difference when guided by courage, integrity, and insight. For Kale, the journey was both challenging and inspiring. He had come to the stars as a curious observer, yet he was shaping the course of civilization simply by staying true to his principles. He did not seek glory, wealth, or power. He sought understanding, fairness, and solutions. And through his quiet courage, he was helping a queen of legendary reputation discover a better way to lead. Zerlia often reflected on the lessons she had learned from Kale. She realized that true authority did not need to be feared, it could be respected. True leadership did not demand obedience, it could inspire cooperation. And the courage to act wisely, even in the face of uncertainty, could create change that no amount of power alone could achieve. The partnership between the human and the queen had become a force of transformation, not through conflict or violence, but through intelligence, understanding, and moral courage. Across countless star systems, the effects were visible. Trade flourished, disputes were resolved, and communities began to function more harmoniously. The galaxy, once dominated by fear and uncertainty, was beginning to embrace a new model of leadership. And through it all, Kale remained steadfast, humble, and observant. He continued to learn, to advise, and to inspire, never losing sight of the simple principles that had guided him from the beginning: fairness, courage, and understanding. Zerlia, once the queen who instilled fear in every alien heart, had begun to redefine what it meant to lead. And the galaxy, watching from distant stars, began to recognize that even the smallest voice, when guided by integrity and insight, could leave an indelible mark on the universe. The galaxy had begun to change, though the transformation was subtle and almost invisible at first. Zerlia, the queen who had once inspired fear in every alien heart, now carried a new presence, a quiet authority shaped by insight, collaboration, and respect. Kale, the human who had accompanied her for so long, had become the silent architect of this shift. He had never sought recognition, yet his influence was profound, touching every system the flagship visited. As they traveled to a cluster of outer colonies, they found communities struggling with outdated infrastructure, scarce resources, and limited communication. Many settlers had resigned themselves to hardship, believing that interstellar aid would never reach them. Zerlia, accompanied by Kale, approached not with threats or demands, but with solutions that combined the queen's resources and the human's ingenuity. Kale quickly assessed the situation. "The settlements are isolated, but they are willing to cooperate," he said. "We can create a network of supply stations and shared communication hubs. If they have a system they can rely on, they will naturally coordinate and support one another." Zerlia nodded, impressed by his clarity. "Then let us proceed. You will guide the implementation." Over the next weeks, Kale coordinated with local leaders, mapping routes for supply stations, optimizing communication lines, and establishing shared governance protocols. The colonies began to function more efficiently, and for the first time, the settlers felt a sense of unity and purpose. It was not Zerlia's power that inspired them, nor Kale's guidance alone. It was the combination of resources, insight, and trust that created real progress. News of their success spread. Aliens from neighboring systems began to take notice, curious about the human who had earned the queen's confidence. Delegations arrived, seeking advice on implementing similar systems in their own regions. Kale, ever humble, guided them patiently, sharing practical solutions and emphasizing collaboration over coercion. Slowly, a network of communication and cooperation extended across multiple star systems. Zerlia observed quietly. Her advisors, who had once worried that Kale's influence might weaken her authority, began to recognize the strength in this new approach. It was not fear that secured obedience, but understanding and respect. The Queen realized that true power could inspire others without forcing them, and Kale had shown her the way. During one of their missions, they visited a planet that had been isolated for decades due to navigational hazards in the surrounding asteroid fields. Trade had ceased, education had declined, and the people were distrustful of outsiders. Zerlia's instinct had once been to enforce control, but she deferred to Kale's counsel. "Allow them to observe first," Kale suggested. "Show them that our intentions are fair. If they see that we respect their autonomy, they will cooperate willingly." Together, they established a system of gradual support. They repaired key infrastructure, introduced educational resources, and facilitated communication with neighboring planets. The local leaders, initially suspicious, began to trust the guidance provided. In a matter of months, the planet had become a productive, cooperative member of the wider interstellar network. Zerlia felt a profound shift within herself. She had always relied on her reputation, her authority, and her strategic brilliance to maintain control. Yet Kale had shown her another dimension of leadership, one rooted in empathy, reasoning, and collaboration. She realized that her influence could be greater not through fear, but through inspiration and guidance. The human's reputation quietly grew. Across the galaxy, beings spoke of a human who had helped the Queen see a new way to lead, a human who had solved complex problems, and a human whose insight had inspired cooperation where there had once been conflict. Kale never sought this attention. He focused on practical solutions, on clear communication, and on fairness. Yet the stories spread, and the impact of his quiet courage became undeniable. As the flagship approached a central hub of interstellar trade, Zerlia and Kale faced a delicate situation. Several factions had long disputed ownership of trade routes, and tensions threatened to disrupt commerce across multiple systems. Zerlia's fleet had the power to enforce control, but Kale suggested a different approach. "We can mediate," he said. "Provide options that ensure each faction benefits. If the solution comes from mutual agreement rather than imposition, it will endure." Zerlia allowed him to take the lead. Kale organized meetings with representatives from each faction, facilitated discussions, and presented solutions that were fair and practical. Slowly, the disputes were resolved. Trade resumed, and the factions began to collaborate, recognizing that shared prosperity was more valuable than domination. The success was celebrated quietly but widely. Aliens across the galaxy began to reconsider their assumptions about leadership, power, and human capability. Kale's presence had become a symbol of reason, fairness, and courage, a reminder that even a single human could influence events on a galactic scale through integrity and insight. Zerlia herself reflected on the journey they had undertaken together. She had been a queen who ruled through fear, and yet she had learned that fear alone could not inspire lasting loyalty or progress. Kale had shown her that patience, understanding, and collaboration could achieve far more than intimidation ever could. Her authority was now strengthened, not diminished, by the trust she fostered through this new approach. During one long observation period aboard the flagship, Zerlia turned to Kale. "I have ruled for centuries, yet you have taught me more about leadership in months than I learned in lifetimes. How do you do it?" Kale smiled humbly. "I only observe, listen, and think carefully. I offer solutions based on reason and fairness. I do not seek to control or command. Leadership is not about power alone. It is about helping others achieve goals while respecting their perspective." Zerlia nodded slowly. She realized that his words were simple, but their implications were profound. For centuries, she had relied on her authority to maintain order. Now she understood that true leadership required more: empathy, collaboration, and the courage to act with integrity. The galaxy itself seemed to respond to this new approach. Systems once isolated or in conflict began to communicate and cooperate. Trade flourished where it had stagnated. Education and infrastructure improved. Leaders who had once relied solely on intimidation began to explore dialogue and partnership. Kale's influence, though quiet and unassuming, had sparked a transformation that was felt far beyond the flagship. Zerlia and Kale continued their journey, visiting worlds and facilitating progress wherever they could. Each mission reinforced the principles they had developed together: fairness, collaboration, transparency, and respect. Kale's calm reasoning complemented Zerlia's authority, creating a dynamic that inspired cooperation rather than fear. One day, they received a message from a distant system previously cut off from interstellar communication. The inhabitants had been struggling with governance, resources, and trade, and they had long believed no assistance could reach them. Zerlia and Kale traveled to the system, where Kale quickly assessed the situation and proposed practical solutions tailored to the needs of each planet. With the Queen's resources and Kale's guidance, they implemented new systems of trade, communication, and governance. The inhabitants embraced the changes, and in a short time, the system was thriving. Zerlia observed the transformation, realizing how much her leadership had evolved since Kale had joined her journey. She had learned to combine power with understanding, decisiveness with empathy, and authority with collaboration. Across the galaxy, whispers of the human who had influenced the Queen became stories of inspiration. Aliens marveled at the idea that one human, using only reason and fairness, could impact entire civilizations. Kale's work became a model for problem-solving, leadership, and interstellar cooperation. For Kale, the journey was never about recognition or fame. He remained focused on practical solutions, on helping communities, and on guiding the Queen toward choices that fostered trust and progress. His humility, coupled with his courage to act thoughtfully, had transformed not only the Queen but also the systems under her influence. Zerlia reflected often on what they had accomplished together. She had once ruled through fear, believing it was the only way to maintain order. Now she understood that leadership was more than power. It was the ability to inspire, guide, and create solutions that benefited everyone. Kale had shown her that courage could be quiet, that wisdom could come from unexpected places, and that even a single human could leave a profound mark on the galaxy. As the flagship moved through the stars, Kale and Zerlia continued their work, visiting new colonies, mediating disputes, and facilitating progress. Each mission reinforced the principles they had developed together: fairness, understanding, collaboration, and courage. The galaxy was slowly transforming, one system at a time, guided by the combined influence of a powerful queen and a humble human. By the end of their journey, Zerlia's reputation had evolved. Aliens still respected her for her strength, but they now admired her for her wisdom, her fairness, and her willingness to listen. Kale's quiet courage had reshaped perceptions, proving that even the smallest voice, guided by integrity and insight, could influence events on a galactic scale. The Queen, who had once instilled fear in every alien heart, had discovered a new way to lead, through trust, understanding, and collaboration. And Kale, the human who had walked beside her, had become a symbol of hope, courage, and reason. Together, they had shown the galaxy that true power was not in domination, but in the ability to inspire, guide, and create lasting change. In quiet moments aboard the flagship, Zerlia often reflected on the lessons learned. She realized that fear might achieve compliance, but understanding achieved cooperation. Authority might enforce rules, but respect inspired loyalty. And courage, even from a human, could transform not only a leader but an entire galaxy. Kale remained humble throughout, focusing on practical solutions and thoughtful guidance. Yet the impact of his presence was undeniable. He had reshaped the way the Queen led, strengthened alliances, and inspired communities across countless systems. His influence, though quiet and unassuming, had sparked a transformation felt across the stars. As they traveled to new systems, the Queen and the human continued their work, forging relationships, solving challenges, and demonstrating a model of leadership built on courage, insight, and integrity. The galaxy watched and learned, inspired by the story of a human who dared to think differently and a queen who embraced a new way to lead. And in the end, the partnership of Kale and Zerlia became a legend, not of fear or domination, but of wisdom, collaboration, and the quiet courage that can change the course of the universe. Their journey proved that even the smallest voices, guided by integrity and insight, could leave an enduring mark across the galaxy.